In the quiet and peaceful town of Kagiso, a little girl named Amale lived a happy life with her father, Tinashe. Their home was small but filled with warmth, laughter, and love. Tinashe was a hard-working man who adored his daughter more than anything in the world. He did everything he could to make sure she never felt alone, even though her mother had passed away when she was very young. Amale grew up hearing beautiful stories from her father every night before bed. He would tell her about her mother, describing how kind and loving she was, making sure Amale knew she came from a family filled with love. Tinashe worked hard every day, but no matter how tired he was, he always made time for his little girl. He would braid her hair in the mornings, walk her to school, and cook her favorite meals. To Amale, he was not just her father, he was her hero. Every morning, Amale would wake up to the smell of her father's cooking and the sound of birds singing outside. She loved running barefoot on the soft grass, feeling the warm sun on her skin. Life was simple but beautiful. She never felt like she was missing anything because her father's love was enough to fill her heart. But life can change in ways we never expect. And for Amale, this happy beginning was only the start of a journey filled with both pain and strength. She didn't know that soon everything would change. Amale's life took a new turn when her father, Tinashe, decided to remarry. He believed that having a mother figure would be good for Amale, someone who could care for her when he was at work and bring more warmth into their home. The woman he married was named Eshe. At first, Eshe seemed kind and gentle. She smiled at Amale, brought her small gifts, and spoke sweetly to Tinashe. Amale, who had always wished for a mother, felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, she would finally have someone to brush her hair, tell her bedtime stories, and love her like her father did. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Eshe helped cook meals and sat with Amale, asking her about school. She even held her hand when they walked to the market. But something felt strange. Amale noticed that when her father wasn't looking, Eshe's smile would fade, and her eyes would grow cold. There were moments when she felt Eshe watching her, not with kindness, but with something else, something dark. As time passed, Eshe's true nature began to show. She wasn't the loving mother Amale had hoped for. When Tinashe was around, Eshe acted caring, making sure to show affection toward Amale. But when they were alone, her voice became sharp, her kindness disappeared, and her eyes burned with silent anger. Amale didn't understand why. She tried to be good, to be helpful, but no matter what she did, Eshe always found a reason to sigh in annoyance or glare at her. Amale wanted to tell her father, but she didn't want to make him sad. He looked so happy with Eshe, and Amale loved him too much to take that away from him. So, she stayed silent, hoping things would get better, but deep in her heart, she felt something uneasy. Like a storm was coming, one that would soon turn her world upside down. Amale woke up to an eerie silence that morning. Usually, she would hear the soft clinking of pots in the kitchen, or her father's deep, gentle voice calling her for breakfast. But today, there was nothing, only a heavy stillness that made her chest feel tight. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and stepped out of her room, her small feet cold against the floor. Something didn't feel right. She pushed open her father's bedroom door and found him lying in bed, his face pale and covered in sweat. His breathing was slow and uneven, as if every breath took all his strength. His strong arms, the same ones that used to lift her high into the air and spin her around, now lay limp at his sides. "Baba," she whispered, her voice shaking. His eyes fluttered open and he tried to smile, but even that seemed too difficult. "I'm just a little tired, my angel," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Amale wanted to believe him, but fear gripped her heart. She had never seen her father like this before. He had always been full of life, always strong, but now he looked weak, too weak. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tight, as if she could transfer her own small strength into him. Days passed, and Tinashe only got worse. He barely ate, barely spoke. His once warm hands grew cold, and his deep, loving voice faded into silence. Amale sat by his bedside every night, refusing to leave him, but Eshe would always pull her away. "He needs rest," she would say, but something in her voice felt off. She never seemed truly sad. She never cried, never showed fear or concern. Instead, she watched. quietly. Then, one terrible night, Amale woke up to the sound of her name. It was Escher's voice, cold and emotionless. Heart pounding, she ran to her father's room, her little hands shaking as she pushed open the door. The room was dimly lit by a small candle, casting long shadows on the walls. She saw Escher standing by the bed, her arms crossed, her face blank. Amal's gaze shifted to her father. He wasn't moving. A sharp pain shot through her chest as she rushed to his side. "Baba!" she cried, shaking his arm. "Please wake up!" But he didn't. His chest didn't rise and fall. His fingers didn't twitch at her touch. His eyes, those warm, kind eyes, were now empty, staring at nothing. A deep, terrible sob rose from her throat as she clutched his arm, begging him to wake up. But he was gone. The days that followed felt like a blur. The funeral was quick, too quick. People came and spoke softly, offering empty words of comfort. Amale sat still, unable to move, unable to speak. It felt like a bad dream, like any moment she would wake up and run into her father's arms again. But she never did. He was truly gone. And then, everything changed. The moment the last visitor left, Escher's kind mask fell away. She no longer spoke in soft tones, no longer pretended to care. Instead, she took full control of the house, her voice sharp and cold. She barely looked at Amale, except when giving orders. The warmth that once filled their home disappeared, replaced by a chilling emptiness. Amale had not only lost her father, she had lost her home, her safety, and the only love she had ever known. And deep in her heart, a terrible fear grew. Something about her father's death felt wrong, like a secret hidden in the shadows, but she was too small, too powerless to fight it. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of her nightmare. Amale's life changed completely after her father's death. The house that was once filled with laughter and love had turned cold and dark. Eschi no longer pretended to be kind. She didn't smile at Amale anymore. She didn't ask her about school or tell her bedtime stories. Instead, her voice was always sharp, her eyes filled with something cruel. One morning, Amale woke up as usual, expecting to get ready for school. She reached for her uniform, but before she could put it on, Eschi stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You won't be going to school anymore," she said flatly. Amale's heart dropped. "But Baba wanted me to," she started, but Eschi's glare silenced her. "Your father is gone. You have work to do." From that day, Amale's world became one of endless chores. While other children carried books to school, she carried buckets of water. While they laughed and played, she scrubbed floors until her hands hurt. Every morning, before the sun had even fully risen, Escher would shake her awake and order her to clean, cook, and wash. Amale's small hands became rough from scrubbing, her feet sore from standing for hours. No matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. If she missed a spot while cleaning, Eschi would grab her by the arm and hiss, "Useless girl, can't you do anything right?" If she took too long washing clothes, Eschi would snatch them from her hands and throw them on the ground. The worst part was the hunger. Eschi barely gave her any food. While she ate full plates of warm meals, she tossed Amale only scraps, leftover bones, dry bread, or nothing at all. At night, Amale would lie on her thin mattress, her stomach aching from hunger, her body sore from the day's work. She missed her father so much it hurt. She wanted to cry, but she knew tears wouldn't change anything. She had no one now, no one to protect her, no one to tell her everything would be okay. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Amale stopped asking to go to school. She stopped hoping that Eschi would change. She learned to move quickly, to stay silent, to avoid anything that might make Escher angry. But deep inside, a fire still burned. She held on to her father's voice, the way he had always told her she was strong, that she was special. Eschi could take away her freedom, her food, and even her happiness. But she could not take away Amale's spirit. Amale's hands trembled as she carried the heavy tray of dishes to the kitchen. Her arms were tired from working all day, and her stomach ached from hunger. She hadn't eaten properly in days. As she took a step forward, her foot caught on a loose tile, and before she could stop it, a plate slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the floor, shattering into tiny pieces. The sound echoed through the silent house like a terrible alarm. Amale froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew what was coming. Within seconds, Eshe stormed into the kitchen, her eyes blazing with fury. She didn't say a word at first, just stared at the broken plate. Then, before Amale could explain, a sharp slap landed across her cheek, making her stumble backward. "Stupid girl," Eshe spat. "You break things, you waste food, and you still think you deserve to eat." Amale's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She had learned not to. Crying only made Eshe angrier. She opened her mouth to apologize, but Eshe grabbed her wrist, her nails digging into Amale's skin. "You need to learn a lesson," she hissed. Amale tried to pull away, but Eshe was too strong. She dragged Amale down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the living room, to a door at the very end of the house. It was an old storage room, one that hadn't been used in years. The wooden door creaked as Eshe yanked it open. The air inside smelled of dust and dampness. It was completely dark. Before Amale could protest, Eshe shoved her inside. She stumbled and fell to her knees. "Since you like breaking things, you can stay here and think about what you've done," Eshe said coldly. Amale scrambled to her feet and ran to the door, but before she could reach it, slam! The door shut in her face. The sound of the lock clicking sent a wave of panic through her chest. Amale pounded on the door. "Please, I'm sorry. Let me out," she cried. But there was only silence. Then she heard Eshe's footsteps walking away, fading into the distance. She was alone. The darkness was overwhelming. There were no windows, no cracks of light, nothing but endless blackness. The air was cold and heavy, wrapping around her like a tight blanket. She curled into a ball on the dusty floor, hugging her knees to her chest. She tried to stay calm, but fear crept into her heart like a shadow. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. She had no way to tell. Her stomach twisted with hunger, her throat dry from crying out for help. Every once in a while, the door would creak open just enough for Eshe to toss in a piece of dry bread or a bowl of watery porridge. Amale would crawl to it, eating in silence, her hands shaking. Then the door would slam shut again, leaving her in the darkness. She felt forgotten, like she didn't exist. But even in the pitch-black room, Amale held on to one thing: hope. She thought about her father, his warm smile, his gentle voice. He would have told her to be strong, to never give up. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I will get out of here. I will survive." No matter how much Eshe tried to break her, Amale refused to be broken. The darkness swallowed her whole. Amale sat in the corner of the room, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The cold floor pressed against her bare skin, and the air smelled of dust, mold, and loneliness. She had no idea how long she had been locked inside. Hours, days, everything blurred together. The only thing she knew was hunger, thirst, and the silence that wrapped around her like an invisible cage. Her stomach growled painfully, twisting in on itself. She pressed a hand against it, trying to ignore the emptiness inside her. Eshe barely fed her, just a crust of dry bread or a bowl of thin porridge, pushed through the door without a word. Sometimes she was so hungry that she licked the bowl clean, desperate for any bit of food left behind. She had never felt hunger like this before. It wasn't just an empty stomach. It was a deep, aching pain that made her body weak and her head dizzy. At night, fear crept into every corner of her mind. The darkness felt alive, pressing against her, whispering terrible thoughts. What if no one remembers me? What if Eshe never lets me out? What if I die here and no one ever knows? The thoughts made her heart race, and panic crawled up her throat. She wanted to scream, to bang on the door until someone heard her. But she had done that before, and no one came. No one was coming. She was alone. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them away. She refused to cry. Crying wouldn't help. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought of her father. She imagined his warm smile, the way he used to hold her close and tell her stories. She remembered the sound of his laughter, the feeling of his strong hands braiding her hair in the mornings. He used to tell her she was special, that she was strong. "You are my little warrior," he would say. She held on to those words like a lifeline. She whispered to herself, "I am strong. I will get out of here." Over and over, she repeated it, forcing herself to believe it. She would not let Eshe win. She would not let this dark room become her prison forever. She didn't know when or how, But one day, she would escape, and when she did, she would never look back. Amale lay on the cold floor, her body weak, her eyes heavy from exhaustion. The darkness around her felt endless, pressing against her like a heavy blanket. She had stopped trying to count the days. Time didn't matter anymore. The only thing that kept her going was the memory of her father's voice, reminding her to be strong. Then, one night, something strange happened. As she lay curled up in the corner, barely awake, she heard it. A whisper. At first, she thought she was imagining it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe hunger was making her hear things. But then, the whisper came again, soft but clear. Amale, stay strong. Her eyes shot open. Her heart pounded in her chest. She sat up, her breath shaky. "Who's there?" she whispered into the darkness, but no one answered. The room was silent again. She pressed her ear against the cold wall, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. But then, a faint voice came through a tiny crack near the floor. "Don't give up," it whispered. "You are not alone." Tears filled Amale's eyes. Someone was there. Someone knew she was trapped. She wasn't completely forgotten. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice didn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, it said, "You will be free soon. Be ready." Amale's heart raced. Hope flickered inside her, small but powerful. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. Someone out there cared. Someone wanted to help. She didn't know who it was or how they found her. But it didn't matter. She held on to their words like a lifeline. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "I will be ready," she whispered back. No matter how dark it was, she knew now. Her story wasn't over yet. The night was different. Amale could feel it. The air inside the dark room was colder than usual, and outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Rain slammed against the roof, and thunder shook the house. She hugged her knees, listening to the storm rage outside. But then, something caught her attention. A soft creaking sound from the door. She slowly crawled toward it, her fingers trembling as she traced the rusty metal of the lock. The storm had made the air damp, and the moisture had seeped into the old lock, weakening it. She wiggled it gently, her heart racing. It felt loose. A spark of hope ignited inside her. Could this be her chance? She pushed harder, but the lock held. Panic rose in her chest. What if she was too weak? What if she failed? She refused to give up. Gritting her teeth, she gripped the lock with both hands, ignoring the pain in her sore fingers. She yanked, twisted, pulled with everything she had. The metal groaned, then crack! The lock snapped. For a moment she froze, unable to believe it. Then reality hit her. She was free. She pushed the door open slowly, wincing as it creaked. The hallway was empty. Eshi was asleep. Now was her only chance. Barefoot and shivering, she stepped out of the room, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it would wake the entire house. She moved quickly but carefully, stepping over loose floorboards, holding her breath with every tiny sound. When she reached the front door, she took one last look back. This house had once been her home, filled with warmth and love. Now, it was nothing but a prison. She turned the handle and slipped outside. The wind hit her like a wave, the rain drenching her instantly. The night was wild, the storm raging like it was trying to help her escape. She didn't stop to think. She ran, barefoot, through the mud, through the sharp rocks that cut into her skin. The cold bit into her bones, but she didn't care. She was free. Tears mixed with the rain as she ran faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get far away. The only thing she could hear was her own heartbeat and the storm whispering around her. For the first time in so long, she wasn't trapped. She wasn't powerless. She was escaping. Amale kept running, her feet bleeding, her body shivering from the cold rain. The night was endless, the road stretching before her like a dark river. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stop. Every time lightning flashed across the sky, she flinched, afraid that Ishi would suddenly appear, dragging her back to that terrible room. Her legs felt heavy, her breath came in short gasps, and her vision blurred from exhaustion. Then, just as she thought she couldn't take another step, she saw a faint light in the distance. It was coming from a small house at the side of the road. Warm, golden light spilling from the windows. A sign of hope. Amale stumbled toward it, her body weak, her teeth chattering. She barely made it to the front gate before her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the wet ground. She wanted to get up, to knock on the door, but she had no strength left. The world around her started fading, her eyelids growing heavy. Then, through the pounding rain, a voice called out, "Oh my goodness!" Footsteps rushed toward her. Gentle hands lifted her from the ground. "Child, what happened to you?" Amale tried to speak, but no words came. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was a kind face, warm eyes, filled with worry. When she woke up, she was wrapped in a soft blanket. A fire crackled nearby, filling the room with warmth. The smell of fresh bread and tea filled the air. She blinked, confused. Was she dreaming? Then she saw the woman sitting beside her. "You're awake," the woman said with a gentle smile. "My name is Nia. You're safe now." Tears filled Amale's eyes. Safe. She hadn't heard that word in so long. Nia handed her a cup of warm tea. "Drink, my dear. Take your time." Amale hesitated, but when the first sip touched her lips, she felt warmth spread through her entire body. She hadn't tasted kindness in so long. She drank slowly, savoring every drop. Nia sat beside her, watching her with gentle concern. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" For a long time, Amale said nothing. She had been holding her pain inside for so long, afraid that no one would listen. But something about Nia, the kindness in her eyes, the softness in her voice, made Amale believe she could trust her. And so, for the first time, she told her story. She spoke of her father, the love and safety she once knew. She spoke of Esha, of the cruelty, the hunger, the darkness. She told Nia about the night she ran away, how she thought she would never make it. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down Nia's face. She reached forward, holding Amale's hands in her own. "You are so brave," she whispered. "No child should ever go through this. But you are not alone anymore. I will help you." Amale looked at her, barely believing the words. No one had ever stood up for her before. No one had ever promised to help. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. Amale woke up to the soft morning light streaming through the window. It felt strange to wake up in a warm bed, wrapped in a soft blanket instead of on a cold, hard floor. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But then she saw Nia sitting by the table, reading a book, and she realized it was real. She was safe. Days passed, and slowly, Amale began to heal. Nia took care of her, making sure she ate proper meals and had clean clothes. Every night, she would tuck Amale in and remind her, "You are safe now. You are loved." Amale had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for, but with each passing day, her heart felt lighter. One morning, as they sat eating breakfast, Nia looked at her with a kind smile. "Amale, how would you like to go to school?" Amale froze. School. She had almost forgotten what it was like to sit in a classroom, to learn, to dream of a future. Eshi had taken that away from her, but now Nia was giving it back. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time, they were happy tears. "I would love to," she whispered. The first day of school was scary. Amale felt nervous walking into the classroom, afraid that the other children would judge her. But as soon as she sat down, something magical happened. The teacher handed her a book, and when she opened it, her heart filled with joy. She had always loved stories. Her father used to tell her the most beautiful tales, and now she was reading them again. With every word, she felt stronger. She started writing her own stories, pouring her emotions onto paper. She wrote about pain, about hope, about a little girl who never gave up. The teachers noticed her talent. They encouraged her, helped her improve, and soon her stories were being shared in class. Other students listened with wide eyes, moved by her words. Amale felt something she had never felt before. She was being heard. Months passed, and her stories spread beyond the classroom. A local newspaper published one of her short stories, and people began to recognize her talent. They wanted to know more about the girl who had suffered so much, but still found the courage to dream. For the first time in her life, Amale felt like she had a future. She was no longer just the girl who had suffered. She was a storyteller. She was a survivor. and she was ready to create a new, beautiful chapter in her life. Eshe thought she had won. She thought no one would ever know the truth about what she had done to Amale. She continued living in Tinashe's house, spending his money, pretending to be a grieving widow. But Karma never forgets. One day, whispers began spreading through the town. People started asking questions. Why had Amale disappeared? Why did Eshe never speak of her stepdaughter? Some neighbors remembered seeing the little girl doing chores all day, looking thin and weak. Others recalled the way Eshe always kept the doors locked, hiding something or someone inside. Then, the truth came out. It started when a man from the bank visited the house. He had come to discuss Tinashe's savings, but when he looked through the records, something was wrong. Large amounts of money had been taken out after Tinashe's death, money that should have been saved for Amale. Eshe had stolen it all. The news spread like wildfire. People were furious. Not only had Eshe taken Amale's father's money, but she had also treated the girl like a slave. The town was filled with anger. And then, the biggest shock came. Amale was alive. When Amale's story appeared in the local newspaper, everything changed. People read about how she had been locked away, how she had suffered in the darkness. They read about her escape, about the night she ran barefoot through the storm. The town that had once ignored Eshe's cruelty now saw her for what she truly was, a monster. Realizing the town had turned against her, Eshe panicked. She packed a small bag, stuffing as much money and jewelry as she could inside. She thought she could run, disappear before the police arrived. But she underestimated the people of Kagiso. The moment she stepped outside, she was surrounded. The neighbors, the shopkeepers, even the children, everyone stood in her way. "You will not run from this," an old woman said. "Not after what you did to that child." Eshe tried to push through, but there was nowhere to go. Moments later, the police arrived. They put her in handcuffs, and for the first time, Eshe had no power, no control. As she was dragged away, people whispered around her, "She deserves this. Let her feel what Amale felt. Justice is finally here." From a distance, Amale watched. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply stood still, watching the woman who had once made her life a nightmare finally face the consequences of her actions. Karma had come for Eshe, and this time, there was no escape. Years passed. But Amale never forgot where she came from. The little girl who once lived in darkness had now stepped into the light. With Nia's love and support, she finished school, growing stronger and wiser each day. But one thing never changed: her love for stories. Writing became her escape, her way of healing. Every night, she poured her heart onto paper, writing about her past, her pain, and her dreams. She wrote about her father's love, about the cruel woman who tried to break her, and about the kindness that saved her. Words became her power, and soon the world began to listen. Her first book was published when she was just 18. It was the story of a girl who had suffered but never gave up. A girl who ran barefoot into the storm and found hope on the other side. The book became a bestseller, touching hearts across the country. People cried when they read her words. They felt her pain, her strength, her courage. Amale didn't stop there. With the money she earned, she built a home for orphaned children. Children who had no one, just like she once did. She made sure they had food, warm beds, and most importantly, love. She sat with them every night, telling them stories, reminding them that no matter how hard life was, they were never truly alone. Newspapers wrote about her. Schools invited her to speak. People wanted to meet the girl who had turned her pain into power. But Amale never let the fame change her. She always remembered the little girl in the dark room, the one who whispered to herself, "I will be free one day." Now, she was free, and she was making sure others found freedom too. The years had not been kind to Eshe. The once proud and cruel woman now sat alone in a cold prison cell, her body weak, her hair grey, her face filled with deep lines of regret. No one visited her. No one spoke her name. The world had moved on, but she remained trapped in the walls of her own mistakes. She thought about Amale every day. At night, she lay awake, haunted by the memories of the little girl she had locked away, the child she had treated like nothing. She had once believed she was untouchable, that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. But now, Karma had given her the greatest punishment. loneliness. One morning, as she sat on her hard prison bed, a guard walked in. "You have a visitor," he said. Eshy's heart jumped. A visitor? After all these years? Could it be Amale? Had she come to forgive her? Maybe, if she apologized, if she cried and begged, Amale would take pity on her. Maybe she would help her get out of this place. Slowly, Eshy was led to a small visitor's room. And there she was, Amale. No longer the weak little girl she had once tormented, but a strong, confident woman. She was dressed beautifully, her posture proud, her eyes calm. She looked like someone who had built a beautiful life, someone who had left the past behind. Eshy's eyes filled with tears. She fell to her knees. "Amale, please," she sobbed. "Forgive me. I was wrong. I was cruel. But I have changed. I have nothing left. I am alone." Amale looked at her, silent for a long moment. The room was filled with the weight of everything that had happened. Eshy expected her to cry, to yell, to show anger. But Amale did none of those things. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "I forgave you a long time ago. Not for you, but for myself. I refuse to carry the weight of your cruelty any longer." Eshy's lips trembled. "Then, will you help me?" she whispered. Amale shook her head. "No, Eshy," she said firmly. "I am not here to save you. I came to show you that you never broke me. I survived. I succeeded. And I have moved on." Tears streamed down Eshy's face. She reached out, but Amale didn't move closer. She had already said everything she needed to say. She turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving Eshy in the prison she had created for herself. As the door closed behind her, Eshy let out a broken sob. She had spent her whole life trying to destroy Amale, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. And now, it was too late. Amale never looked back. She had a future to live, dreams to chase, and lives to change. She had won. Amale stood on the grand stage, the bright lights shining down on her. The hall was packed with people from all walks of life, students, teachers, parents, journalists, and even those who had once suffered in silence, just like she had. The air was thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on her, every heart waiting to hear her words. But Amale wasn't nervous. She had told her story many times before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just telling her story. She was giving others the courage to tell their own. She stepped closer to the microphone, took a deep breath, and let her voice fill the room. "For a long time, I thought my voice didn't matter. I thought my pain would never end. I believed that no one cared, that no one would ever save me. But I was wrong. I survived. And now, I stand before you, not as a victim, but as proof that no pain lasts forever." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the reporters, who had come to cover her speech, stopped taking notes, caught in the emotion of her words. Some people wiped away tears, others leaned forward, hanging onto every sentence. "I know what it feels like to be trapped," she continued, her voice steady, yet full of emotion. "To cry in the dark, to feel forgotten, to wonder if life will ever get better. But I am here to tell you, it does get better. You are not alone. No matter how deep the darkness seems, there is always a way out. There is always hope." She looked around the hall, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "I want you all to remember something. Kindness always wins. There were people who tried to break me, who tried to silence me, who wanted me to believe that I was worthless. But they failed, because kindness, love, and hope are stronger than any cruelty in this world. And if you are struggling, if you feel like no one hears you, I want you to know this. I hear you, I see you, and I promise you, you matter." A ripple of emotion spread through the audience. Some people nodded, their eyes filled with understanding. Others held hands, comforted by her words. In the front row, a young girl with tear-streaked cheeks whispered something to her mother. "She's talking about me." Amale took one last deep breath. No one should ever suffer in silence. If you are in pain, if you are afraid, don't be ashamed to ask for help. There are people who care. There are people who will listen. Never be afraid to speak up, because your voice is powerful. Your voice can change everything. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, thunderous applause. The entire room stood up, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The energy was overwhelming. But Amale didn't smile for the applause. She smiled because she knew, somewhere in that crowd, there was someone who needed to hear those words. Someone who now had the strength to fight, to speak up, to believe in themselves. As she stepped off the stage, people rushed to hug her, to thank her, to tell her how much her story meant to them. But deep down, Amale already knew. This wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt lost, to everyone who had ever suffered, to everyone who needed hope. And as she walked out into the night, the cool breeze touching her face, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink as Amale walked through the quiet cemetery. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves around her. She held a small bouquet of white lilies in her hands, her father's favorite flowers. With every step, memories of him filled her heart. She could almost hear his laughter, feel his warm embrace, and see his kind eyes looking at her with pride. She reached his grave and knelt down, gently placing the flowers on the smooth stone. Her fingers traced his name, Tinashe Dlamini, the man who had loved her more than anything in the world, the man who had once promised to protect her, even though life had taken him away too soon. A deep sadness filled her chest, but this time, it wasn't the crushing grief she had once felt. This time, it was different. It was a sadness mixed with love, with gratitude, with strength. "Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "I did it. I survived. I fought through everything, and I made it. I know you're watching me, and I hope I've made you proud." A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away with a small smile. "I still miss you every day, but I carry your love with me. It's what keeps me going." She sat there for a while, letting the silence wrap around her like a warm blanket. The past had tried to break her, but it had only made her stronger. She had turned her pain into purpose, her suffering into strength. She had found a new family, built a new life, and helped others who had once felt as lost as she had. She knew her father would have been proud. As the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, Amale stood up. She took one last look at her father's grave, then turned toward the path leading out of the cemetery. She wasn't walking away from him. She was carrying him with her, in her heart, in her dreams, in every step she took. With her head held high and a new journey ahead, Amale walked toward her future. A future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. And this time, she knew, nothing could ever dim her light again. If Amale's story touched your heart, imagine how many more lives we can change by sharing powerful stories like this. Subscribe now to stay inspired, to stand up for those who can't, and to be a part of a community that believes in kindness, strength, and hope. Your support means more voices get heard, more stories get told, and more lives are changed. Hit that subscribe button and be a part of something bigger, because together we can make sure that no one suffers in silence again.